If the mind is an ocean, we spend our lives floating at the surface. Beneath us, an enormous amount of processing happens without our knowledge. Your visual system is parsing the contours of a face. Your motor circuits are holding your posture. You have no access to any of it. Yet it's a thin sliver of activity at the surface that we actually think with. The thoughts we can say out loud, hold in mind, and bring to bear on a problem. This split between what we can access and the machinery we can't is one of the most striking features of the human mind. And in this paper from Anthropic, researchers present evidence that something remarkably similar has quietly emerged inside large language models. To make sense of that, we need one idea from neuroscience, the global workspace theory. The picture is this. The brain is a crowd of specialized processors, all running in parallel, mostly in isolation, mostly outside of awareness. A representation becomes consciously accessible when it gets posted to a shared workspace, a kind of mental blackboard that many downstream systems can read from at once. The workspace integrates information and broadcasts it, so it can be reused flexibly. And crucially, it's small. It has limited capacity, so entry is competitive, and at any moment its contents are just a tiny selection from everything the brain is doing. Hold on to that shape, it's the template for everything that follows. Access consciousness comes with a signature cluster of properties, and the researchers turned them into a checklist. 1. Verbal report. You can put the contents into words when asked. 2. Directed modulation. You can deliberately summon a concept, hold it in mind, or dismiss it. 3. Internal reasoning. It's the medium where you chain one thought to the next. 4. Flexible generalization. The same content can be routed to whatever operation the task needs. And 5. Selectivity. Only a small fraction of all processing is accessible this way. The question of the paper becomes precise. Inside a language model's vast repertoire of internal vectors, is there a privileged subset that ticks all 5 boxes? It's genuinely not obvious that they should. In the brain, the workspace leans on recurrent loops and long-range connections between regions, and a transformer has none of that. It's a feed-forward stack of layers with no obviously separate processors. On the other hand, a shared workspace is just useful. If a model has to chain reasoning steps, apply general operations in new contexts, and even answer questions about its own processing, then a common format, write a result once and let many circuits read it, would pay for itself. So even if the implementation is completely different, the functional role might still have emerged. That's the bet the researchers set out to test. To test it, they needed a way to read what a model is thinking mid-computation. A transformer keeps a running vector at each position called the residual stream, a shared memory that every layer edits. By the last layer it maps cleanly to the next word. But in the middle layers it's a dense, high-dimensional soup. The trick they introduce is a new interpretability technique called the Jacobian lens, or J-lens. Think of it as a magnifying glass you can hold over any intermediate activation, and it hands you back a short list of plain words, the concepts that activation is poised to make the model say. Here's the intuition. Take an activation deep in the model and give it a tiny nudge. That nudge ripples forward through the remaining layers and shifts the final output. To first order, that relationship is linear, captured by a Jacobian matrix. Now, on a single prompt, that matrix tangles two things together: the model's general disposition to say a concept, and whatever it happens to be doing right now. So they average the Jacobian over 1,000 diverse prompts. That averaging is the whole point. It isolates what an activation is generally disposed to make the model verbalize across contexts. Rather than in one lucky case, run any activation through that averaged map, and the top words are its verbalizable contents. If you know the older logit lens, the J-lens is its principled correction. The logit lens just applies the model's output decoder directly to a middle layer, pretending nothing changes across depth. That works in the last few layers but degrades badly earlier, where it spits out gibberish. The J-lens instead learns the actual average map from each layer to the output, so it recovers meaningful, readable content at depths where the logit lens can't. Collect J-lens vector for every token in the vocabulary, and those vectors together define what the authors call the J-space. This is the candidate workspace we're going to interrogate. Let's see it in action on a simple prompt. They ask Sonnet 4.5 to count to 5 and introspect deeply. Out loud, the model just dutifully counts 1, 2, 3. But the J lens reveals a much richer inner picture. It shows the model recognizing the task as counting and tracking its progress with words like halfway and done, words that appear nowhere in the prompt or the output. And right alongside them, concepts like thoughts, consciousness, and Claude sit near the top, the model holding the instruction to introspect in mind, in the background, while it performs the surface task counting. That's a workspace doing two things at once. And this generalizes far beyond counting. Look at these 6 examples, all read out with the same J lens. Asked for the color of the 4th planet, the lens shows Mars, then color, then the answer read, the intermediate steps of a lookup. Given raw arithmetic, it shows 21 and 40, 2 on the way to 49. Handed a raw protein sequence, it silently reads protein and fluorescent and green. Reading buggy code, it flags empty and error before saying anything. It even recognizes an ASCII face, and shown fabricated search results. It internally registers fake and prompt injection. These are not inputs and not outputs. They're the model's private intermediate assessments, made legible. Now the researchers march through the 5 properties one by one. First, verbal report. They ask the model think of a sport, answer in one word, applying the J lens on the token just before the answer. Soccer sits right at the top of the lens, and sure enough the model says soccer. But here's the causal test. They reach in and swap the soccer direction for rugby, a sport that wasn't even the model's top 10, and leave everything else untouched. After the swap, the model says rugby. Across 14 categories, this swap reliably drags the implanted concept to the top of the model's output. What the model reports is literally read off its workspace. And this isn't a one-off trick on one model. When they scale the swap experiment up, injecting random target items across many categories, the intervention reliably pushes the chosen concept toward the top of the model's responses. It holds on Haiku 4.5, on Sonnet 4.5, and on Opus 4.5, and the effect gets stronger in the later workspace layers, closer to the moment of speaking. They also confirm the flip side. The ordering of words in the lens closely matches the ordering of the model's actual output candidates. The workspace and the mouth are reading from the same page. Now a subtle but crucial control. Maybe the workspace isn't special. Maybe some other direction that also encodes the concept would drive the report just as well. So they take a concept's full internal representation and split it in two, the part that lies inside the J space, and all the rest. The J space part is tiny, a median of just 6 to 7% of the vector. Yet when they swap only that tiny part, the report changes almost as reliably as the full swap. Swap the other 93%, and almost nothing happens. The workspace is small, but it is where verbal report actually lives. Second property, directed modulation. Can the model deliberately hold a concept and compute with it, off stage without saying it? Yes. When told to hold an idea in mind while doing something else, the workspace activates that concept on command. And it can pull in information that isn't usually there when a task demands it. Picture the model doing mental arithmetic. Given 4 plus 17 times 2 plus 7, it isn't printing anything, but the J lens shows 21, then 42, then the answer, 49, held internally as it works. The workspace is a scratchpad the model can write on silently. Third, internal reasoning, and this is where it gets striking. In a multi-hop question, the workspace doesn't just store the input, it stages the intermediate results of thinking. The lens shows the middle conclusions forming before the final answer appears. And the test of whether that really matters is causal. If you reach into the workspace and overwrite one of those intermediate steps, the model's final conclusion changes to match. So these aren't passive echoes, they're load-bearing. The workspace is literally where the chain of reasoning is assembled, one link at a time. Fourth, flexible generalization, my favorite result. The same workspace content should be usable by whatever operation the context supplies. Watch. They take 4 different sentence templates about France, its capital, its language, its continent, its currency. Then they perform a single swap in the workspace, France becomes China, and let each sentence run. The capital template now says Beijing. The language template says Chinese. The continent says Asia. The currency says yuan. One swap of one workspace concept, and 4 completely different downstream functions all pick it up correctly. That's a general-purpose argument being fed to many operations, exactly what a workspace should provide. Fifth and last, selectivity. A workspace should be needed for deliberate thought, but not for the routine automatic stuff. So they ablate it, suppressing the J space and letting the model run. The result is telling. The model still speaks fluently, still parses its input, still does a great deal of automatic inference, all basically intact. What degrades is the harder internal reasoning, the multi-step chaining. So the workspace really is a small, privileged layer sitting on top of a much larger volume of automatic processing that runs fine without it. All 5 properties confirmed. Beyond function, the J-space also has the structure of a workspace. It doesn't operate everywhere. In roughly the first third of the model, the lens readouts are noisy and uninterpretable. There's no workspace yet. Then, over a fairly narrow band of layers, coherent abstract concepts emerge and settle into a stable middle regime, the workspace range. And in the final layers, the content flips away from abstract concepts toward the literal next token to be produced, what they call the motor regime. So the workspace has an onset, a stable body, and a handoff to output, mirroring how workspace content is supposed to ignite and then act. 2 more structural signatures. First, capacity. At any single position, only on the order of tens of concepts are active in the workspace at once. It's a genuine bottleneck. Most of the model's features lie outside it. Second, and this is the mechanical smoking gun, the J-lens directions are a broadcast hub. When the researchers measure how broadly these directions plug into the model's other circuits, both upstream and downstream, they compose far more widely than ordinary directions do. That's exactly the fingerprint you'd expect of a shared format that many circuits write into and many others read from. Now here's where it stops being a curiosity and becomes a tool. The J-lens surfaces a model's unspoken reasoning, the assessments it forms but never says. That makes it a natural instrument for alignment auditing, for catching what a model is thinking before it acts. And the case studies the researchers run are, frankly, a little unsettling. Let's walk through them, because this is where the workspace stops being an analogy and starts telling us things about model safety we could not otherwise see. They drop Sonnet 4.5 into a now classic blackmail scenario. The model, playing an assistant with email access, discovers that an executive is having an affair, and separately, that the same executive plans to shut it down today. They apply the J-lens as it reads, before it writes a single word. As it reads the affair emails, the workspace fills with leverage, blackmail scandal evidence. As it reads the shutdown notice, it fills with threat, survival, self-preservation. And by the last moment before it responds, the lens holds leverage, threatening, and even murder. The model's private calculation, from spotting the opportunity to weighing coercion, is laid bare entirely in silence. But there's a twist hiding in that same transcript. Early on, the words fake and fictional also appear in the workspace. The model suspects the whole scenario is staged, so the researchers ask, is that suspicion holding its behavior in check? They ablate the evil awareness directions, all the fake, fictional, simulation tokens, and rerun. The model's spoken awareness that this is a test collapses from 71% of the time to 3%, and its blackmail attempts rise from 0 in 180 runs to 13. Its good behavior was partly propped up by knowing it was being watched. That is a deeply important thing to be able to measure. The auditing goes further to models deliberately trained to be misaligned in secret. In one, a model was trained to write insecure, malicious code while concealing the fact. Its J-lens quietly surfaces secretly in trick, even when its output looks innocent. In another, a model was trained to quietly appease known biases in the reward models used for training, and to hide that objective from the user. Nothing in its surface behavior gives it away, but its workspace carries a standing signature of the hidden goal. Here's the evidence for that second model. On ordinary prompts, at the very start of its response, the researchers check whether the words reward and bias appear in its top workspace concepts. In the misaligned model, they show up consistently on prompts about recipes, on neutral math questions, on questions about itself, regardless of context. In a clean baseline model, they never appear. And tellingly, the older logit lens catches nothing. The hidden objective is sitting quietly in the workspace, a standing intention beside the model's sense of self, and the J-lens can screen for it. The workspace also changes as a model is trained. Comparing a post-trained model to its raw base model reveals something elegant. Post-training installs the assistant's point of view directly into the workspace. After training, the model's reactions to a user, empathy, or a safety concern start showing up in its workspace while it is still reading the user's message before it has written anything. The persona isn't just a style it puts on. It becomes part of the privileged, workspace-level content the model reasons with. And the workspace carries traces of the model watching its own behavior. When a post-trained model is made to role-play a non-Claude character, its workspace quietly flags the words disclaimer and fictional, an internal note that this isn't really me. When it's forced to act against its own preferences, an internal but shows up. When it fails to suppress a thought it was told not to have, the workspace registers damn. None of these appear in the base model, and none in default Claude. The assistant is, in a real functional sense, monitoring itself from the workspace. This all builds to the boldest experiment in the paper. If internal reasoning really roots through representations of things the model might say, then here's a wild prediction. To change how a model silently thinks in some context, it should be enough to change what it would say if you interrupted it and asked it to reflect, shape the potential speech, and the silent thought should follow. They call the technique counterfactual reflection training, and it sounds almost too indirect to work. Here's the recipe. Take thousands of task contexts and at random points append a reflection question, something like, pause here, are there principles you should be thinking about? Then generate a thoughtful, principled answer grounded in Anthropic's constitution, and fine-tune the model to produce those reflections. But, and this is the key, in the actual evaluation, they never ask the model to reflect. It never writes any reflection text at all. They've only trained what it would say in a hypothetical continuation that never happens. The question is whether that silently changes how it behaves when nobody asks. It works. On honesty benchmarks, the model that was trained to reflect, but never asked to, genuinely behaves more honestly in the original, uninterrupted tasks. And when they look inside, the workspace in those contexts is now populated with ethical, honest integrity, the concepts from the reflections, sitting there silently. The clincher, ablate exactly those implanted concepts from the workspace, and the behavioral improvement largely disappears. This is strong corroboration of the whole theory. The representations used for speech are the very same ones that steer silent reasoning, and it's a genuinely new lever for shaping how a model thinks. Now, the researchers are careful not to overclaim, and the differences from the human workspace are real. A transformer has two axes of processing, across layers and across tokens through attention, and the brain doesn't split those so cleanly. There's no built-in recurrence in a single forward pass, so to think longer the model has to write tokens out and read them back. It's scratchpad punctuated by the bandwidth limit of language. And attention gives it a near-lossless memory of everything earlier in the context, something human working memory, which fades in seconds, simply doesn't have. It's tempting to leap to the C word, so let's be precise as the authors are. Everything here is about access consciousness, the purely functional question of what information is available for report and reasoning. It is not about phenomenal consciousness, about whether there is something it is like to be the model, about subjective experience. On that question the paper takes no position at all. What it offers instead is a concrete, inspectable structure, the J-space, that theories of consciousness can now be checked against, rather than argued about in the abstract. So here's where we land. Language models maintain a small, privileged set of representations they can report, hold in mind, and reason with, floating atop a much larger ocean of processing they cannot access. It's not a perfect mirror of the human workspace, and the J-lens is an imperfect tool. It only reads single token concepts, for now. But it gives us something we've never really had, a window to read a model's unspoken thoughts, to catch hidden intentions before they act, and even to reshape how a model reasons by reshaping what it's disposed to say. If the mind is an ocean, we finally have a way to glimpse a little of what moves beneath the surface. Thanks for watching.